Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So, now we shall be talking about very different topics of security. That means, they are very relevant, but they are not often talked about, right. So, here I will briefly go through 3 different topics as such. The first one is gap analysis. Now, gap analysis may be said to firstly find out the gap or the gaps that exist in a given security system with respect to its policy details. So, first thing is that to identify whether there is difference between the policy and the implementation of the policy. That means, any organization will always have some security policy, some statements. Policy is nothing but some statements, and all of the statements may not be implemented in the way that is mentioned in the policy. Now, this may not be intentional at all, it may depend on various factors. Okay. For example, first factor is say high overhead, maybe the implementation will be too much costly. So, people may refrain from implementing. Others may be the actual perception of the policy may not actually be implemented or validated and verified. So, that may be a problem. So, in this way we may find that certain gap will exist between the policy and maybe the implementation, and hence in the security system. After the gaps are identified, then obviously they have to be studied with intimate detailings. That means, what are the gaps actually? This is very, very important. You can understand that this is not the same, very nice, but what is it missing? So, you have maybe you have to point it down that this is not there, this is not there, like that, and they may seem to be very innocuous at first, but when you come to this stage of analysis, then you find that how these gaps may be say approached from both the points of view. That means, not only from being compromised, but also from being how to protect the gaps. Okay. So, analysis is also very, very important consideration if you are able to find a gap, because then only you can take the steps, and therefore, just like each and every say technique or system has some standards mentioning that you must do this in this case. So, here also there are certain mentioned standards. So, gap analysis provides a comparison of your security program, that means whatever you have in your organization versus the overall best security practices, because you have already known that in your security program there are certain loopholes or gaps, but the best practices will not have all these things. So, firstly you compare these two. Okay. So, you have now basically 2 lists, one your own local, the other may be global. That means, how you are differing from the standards. So, by comparing these best practices to actual practices, that means what you have adopted in your organization, it could be pointed out where the vulnerabilities and the risks are lurking. So, what will you do? So, it is not only important that a gap analysis be conducted, it is also important that it be done correctly, because people may suggest very different ways. I mean, sometimes ad hoc may be that why do not you do this, why do not you do that, like this. You know that there is a gap like this, from here there will be breach of security. So, just write a program or just provide an intrusion detection system like that. I mean, many people will suggest many things, particularly the management maybe, because they will think that they may not go overboard with time and money and etcetera. So, everybody will try to think of some short term solution, okay. But that may not work always. So, everything has to be done properly. So, firstly the policy and the procedures you have to check. So, the organization needs to review all mechanisms on a network or system according to its security policy. This review actually many times we do not even do, is not it? Many a times you may find that sometime the organization or institute or industry whatever has implemented or has said something, say some 10 years 15 years back, and it is still continuing, right. Even in our day to day life we do such things, whatever practices we were having say for the last 10-15 years, we are continuing with that, though we know that they are outdated. Some of them are definitely outdated, does not hold any ground nowadays. Okay. So, review is very very important. So, outdated policies can therefore be removed, either removed or updated according to the current requirements, and changes must be overall in all the levels. That means, it is not that I simply at the uppermost level made a change in the policy, but I have to also ensure that it gets implemented correctly, then only the change will be reflected. Okay. Otherwise, the same thing will go on happening if implementation is not there. Management needs to understand the approval process. Now, the most important thing is that, I mean, one of the important things is that involvement of these people who are otherwise not directly related with the technological developments. Okay. So, they may not be in the know of the latest happenings, hence they must know how and why you are telling that this policy is outdated, you have to change it, and how the change will be done. Again, that process should be documented, that you have gone to some board, you have followed these best practices and you are finding this is not done nowadays. So, all this must be documented, and this process, if the management is involved, then obviously it will be easier to get it done. Administrators need to have standard operating procedures to complete the changes appropriately. That means, not only the management, they will simply say sign the papers, yes, go ahead, okay. But the actual implementers, that means the administrators must know the standard procedures to implement these changes. Then industry standard framework, with which will you compare. Okay. So, one of the most common frameworks is the ISO 27002 standard, and this was from 2013. So, I believe some other have also come up. So, it provides best practice recommendations on information security management. This standard covers best practices for areas like risk assessment, access control, change management, physical security and many others. So, it actually maybe it is focused for information security management, but obviously since information security is nothing but the overall part of your network security, because information is the basis. Okay. So, we must also know this. So, basically the focus will be on risk assessment, access control, change management. This is also very, very important, as you will understand later. Or just a simple example may do, I think, that whenever we write a program, right, many a times we go on changing it, and after some times I may find that this version is not working at all. So, I have to go back again, but if I have not kept the earlier version properly, then yes, I may not be able to get back ever. Okay. The industry standard framework will provide a good benchmark. So, that can be compared with the organization's security policies and against the network controls. So, it is recommended that someone without any connection to the network architecture or the system in place evaluate the organization's security plan. What it means? That means a third party evaluation, because it is quite possible that if I belong to some institute, I may have some weak point for that institute, and hence I may say no, this security policy is good, this policy is good, you need not change it, why, etc. right. So, it is better that you have somebody completely different, not attached to this organization, to evaluate your policies. Some industry compliance standards may require an outside consultant. That means, your organization may not deal with all the different say fields or areas of application, but while you are measuring the best practices against your organization, you may have to cover the entire fields. For example, I just give you a small example. Say your organization will have employees, right, and those employees will have their own different records, and these will include medical records also, but your company actually does not deal anything with medical sort of. So, there are no doctors, no caregivers, no nurses attached to your organization. Okay. So, how do you know what policies are to be maintained for securing your employees' health records? Okay. So, you may need some outside consultant also, I mean not the evaluator, but consultant for that purpose. Then comes the auditing, because once you have compared, right. So, then you have to write down certain things. So, it will involve reviewing the framework selected along with any updated policy and procedure. I think auditing all of you know. Okay. It simply mentions what has been done, what was there, what has been done, what is now. Okay. So, it involves reviewing the framework selected along with any updated policy and the procedure to implement that updated policy. I mean that procedure may not have been just now implemented, but mention that this updated policy may be implemented like this, some guidelines, some hints, etc. It can verify that the organization is following its own policy by applying the framework standards to them. That means, if the standard mentions some clause, then this organization will adopt it according to its own requirements. Okay. That is the meaning of this. That means, it is following its own policy, but by applying the standards to them, not just they have written some policy like that ad hoc. Using the selected framework, check a procedure and find if it is a security breach and against organization standards. So, this selected framework will be definitely consisting of whatever you have, in what formats you have, how you are getting the data, how you are keeping it, all these things will be there. Okay. So, you have to find out whether there is a security breach and which is against your standards of the organization. Now, how to find security breaches, right? So, again there may be some policies written on that also, that if this happens, consider this to be security breach. Okay. For example, say in the policy was mentioned that the network of the organization must be monitored. So, there is some monitoring software. Firstly, there may be some intrusion detection software also, all things like that may be there, right. Now, suppose how will you are monitoring, fine, you are getting the data, but how will you know that a breach has occurred? So, that must also be in the policy, that if something like this happens, say in the odd hours of night, some say 5 people enter a lab, then you know that something odd is happening. So, that may be considered to be security breach, like that. So, in the policy only it will be mentioned that to find some security breach using some say general method, and that method may be like this, that yes, there is a say guard and etcetera and other things, the switches were off, but when people come such and such things happen, etcetera. So, in that way it will be implemented. So, you know that the breach has happened. And how do you know this? Because the monitoring is going on 24 hours into 7, that is why. Okay. So, the auditing will take the policy and procedure and apply the framework towards them to ensure it complies with the new standards. So, that means the auditor team will not complete its work by simply writing some updated policy and a procedure. Okay. It will also try to apply the existing framework, that means according to this format this has to be implemented and so, and thus it will also comply that yes, this is according to the new standard also. Technical review verifies the technical infrastructure of the organization to find whether it is up to date with the framework. Yes, because somebody may be using say some high level language for some particular implementation which is say decades old. So, people now the review committee, technical review committee may say that no, if you implement it using this sort of framework, it will work better. That may be the case. So, that may be reviewed under technical review. Reviews the security of its systems at a granular level and apply the framework to the network or the system to determine if it meets the standards. And since here we are talking about the security of the system, okay, or the organization, right. So, we will be technically reviewing the security details of the system, okay, and then say that no, why are you using say for this particular antivirus software, it is outdated, why do not you use this, are you updating the dictionary daily, we can place those questions. So, these will be technical reviews with respect to security. So, these are some of the examples, that whether the organization uses antivirus on all of its servers. Maybe many a times it is found that somebody tells that no, this server is only for say internal purposes. So, we do not, and nobody uses it apart from the administrator and few personnel. So, we do not have any antivirus here, but that is not the case. It may be connected with a network, people may use different sorts of external drives. So, there is every possibility of malwares coming into the server, but these may not be always detected with our own employees of the organization, because they have taken it for granted, or they may not even know that there is no antivirus in this server at all. Okay. This is a very common case. This happens almost I mean in regular ways in many organizations. Okay. One of the most important things of security is evaluating people, okay, and processes, of course, that means people and the processes that are followed. So, gather the data on organization's IT environment, application inventory, organizational charts, policies and processes and other relevant details. Learn which security policies are already in place, because as I said, all may not be in the place. Okay. Assess future security risks. So, now it is very, very important that how you assess or how you even come up with the idea that these risks may happen in the future, but why? If you go on following this trend, that means with these things at hand and these processes that you are following, these may be the risks that are waiting in the future. Okay. So, assess future security risks, conduct in-depth interviews with the organization's key stakeholders and specific departments like HR and legal, because whatever you do, legal aspects are very, very important. And these stakeholders always mean that they involve, I mean everybody, right from the customers that these organizations serve, to the employers, to the employees, the people involved, everybody who in any way, even you can say the vendors who supply instruments and other things to your organization. Because if everything if anything untoward happens in this organization, then everybody will be affected, maybe in some less or I mean big way, that is different, but all of the stakeholders will be affected. Need to address human behavior to decrease threats to data. This is very, very important, because many a times we have a single system administrator. Even the day he is absent, we are all at sea. What to do if something happens in the server? Maybe the server is on like that. So, general running is not of a problem, okay, but some particular happenings may require attention of the administrator. So, what will happen then? So, basically we are dependent on somebody. So, obviously, his behavior as well as the behavior of the valid users of the system, because we are valid users. So, we have authorization for many accesses in the system. So, who knows, somebody may get malicious at some point of time. So, periodic evaluation, assessment based on some interview or questionnaire may be done. Staff members can provide details on how various controls are implemented. That means, the people that are involved in the overall process will actually give you the current situation, right, because there may be written, there may be many things that this is done, this is provided, this is there, but in practice you may find that, say for example, the antivirus is outdated, okay. There is actually only one password file and that may not be encrypted also. So, all these things may be found out if you just ask some persons related to the activities. So, for example, you may find that is there a standard role based policy in place that helps ensure that the correct access is provided to each job position. That means, what type of policy, access control policy you use. Suppose you have asked. So, people have said for example, that we use role based access policy, okay, very nice. But say in the organization there will always be promotions. Okay. So, when I move from some position to some other position, I may change my department also. So, in that case, why should I be given access to my previous department's affairs, right? So, these things may not be changed at all. I mean, though you have moved and you may not also intentionally having a look into your earlier department's affairs, but it is actually been given to you, the access is already given and was not withdrawn, and nobody knew also about that. Okay. So, threats are those things, these are the gaps. Another is staff training provided to keep your company abreast of evolving security risks, because how shall I know if I do not have any exposure, if I do not undergo some training, I may not also able to understand that this is actually a risk, security risk, right. I may not be able to differentiate that this is the actual risk to my system. Okay. So, staff training awareness is always very, very important. Then the data gathering technology, that means data gathering and the technology is involved. So, compare the best practice controls or relevant requirements against the organizational controls. To have a clear picture of the technical environment, the protections in place and the overall security effectiveness. That means, say for example, all of you know that in the I mean time, in due time, different types of data as well as volume of data will be generated. Now, how you keep them, whether they are safe in some safe place in the sense some storage may be, okay, but how they are kept, or are you, say for example, nowadays many organizations are using cloud storage. Okay. So, are you following all the steps there for keeping your data safe and secure? So, what is the technology that you are using, whether it is I mean guaranteeing the safeguards, etcetera and etcetera. So, in-depth security knowledge will allow to see how this security process matches up to other processes. Of course, because if the staff are not trained, okay. For example, during cloud security some questions always crop up in our mind that maybe since my data is in some cloud server, everybody is able to see my data. But actually this should not be the case, because the responsibility is from both sides, the cloud service provider as well as myself. Okay. So, if I am not aware of my duty, then these things will happen. And controls, in-depth security knowledge will also allow to see how the controls that have proven successful, especially when compared to other companies and security controls within this specific industry. So, this means that the controls that I am allowing in my company, okay, maybe in time they are very effective. So, I am thinking that since these are successful controls, so I will not remove them, but they may be outdated. So, I have to always keep abreast of the happenings inside, I mean happening in front of me in the same type of industry that I am working in, as well as the standards practices, because not all industries will have the same types of say implementations. Say I belong to IT industry, so its working will definitely be different from some other say car industry. I mean say because it has a massive production part, apart from it, it also has its IT department, undoubtedly that is also very, very large, okay. But it also has its manufacturing units and some whole lot of things with it. So, I cannot compare my IT industry only, my IT organization with a car company organization, right. I have to compare myself with some similar IT organization. Then comes the analysis part. So, we have to correlate the findings and the results across all factors to create a concise picture of this organization's IT security profile, because then only we will be able to come to some permanent result sort of things. Then the strength and weakness analysis is performed. It has got a terminology also nowadays, SWOT analysis, opportunities and threats. So, then only we can make recommendations for moving forward with a security plan, which is right for this organization. Obviously, only after the analysis you can say that. So, this security roadmap entire thing will consider the risk, staffing, budget requirements as well as time frames. This is also very important. That means, yes, we have say found out that these are the requirements. Okay. So, if we are lax enough, we may say that no, I will not implement these because this is not required now, maybe after 6 months I can see there is some requirement, then I will implement this. We can go on saying like this. Hence, there always must be some particular time frames, just like project completion time frames, where you have set milestones. For every task there should be some milestones, otherwise it will go on and it will never be effectively implemented. So, the findings and the prioritization. So, organization reviews the findings of the phases, appraises what was found and arranges the tasks to fix the holes. So, this seems to be a very good proposition that this must be done. This may mean now how this will be done, okay? That must also be known, otherwise everybody will follow some ad hoc policy. So, this may mean meeting with the management and interviewing anyone needed for more information. That means, for clarifying, that is not for more information, basically for clarification of the findings, because many a times the findings may be presented in such a way that it is not very clear what was there, what is required now, etc. So, maybe for that you may have to arrange meetings. It also includes addressing the holes in policy and procedure. Of course, this is what was wanted in the first place, right. So, then discuss the possible fixes that are needed immediately and find out what needs to be in place technically to meet the current benchmark. Now, you see one point is always there, that needs immediate attention. Okay. Yes, this is true that some gaps are there that has been identified, which has very high risk. That means, if it occurs and the probability of occurrence is also high, and say the damage that it will cause is also of high level. So, it needs immediate attention, that is true, but what about the others? They may not need immediate attention just in today or tomorrow, but within a few days they will also need attention. So, everything must be prioritized accordingly. I mean, you may really prioritize, that is why the step is findings and prioritization. Okay. And also what you require, that is very very important, that what needs to be in place technically to meet the current benchmark, because if you lag very much behind, then to keep your pace up with the current standings, you must know what to do next. Okay, and that should be done if not immediately, but also very shortly, because otherwise the benchmark will always go on evolving, okay, and hence you will be lagging behind and behind. there should be a list of areas that need improvement, that means priority wise you can do that. The list can be compiled by the audit team while doing the spot audits between the scheduled gap analysis. So, I mean who will compile the list? Obviously, there may be a question that I cannot do this, I will not do this because I have other works, all these things will crop up. So, the list can be compiled by the audit team. When exceptions are found, the particular area of the framework should be reviewed. Whenever there is some mismatch between what is expected and what is available. Okay. So, obviously, that area needs more focus and it has to be resolved very shortly. The goal is to have a consistent adherence to the framework, that means the framework that you have chosen for the analysis of gaps in your system with respect to the current best practices standards.